So, welcome back and hello if you are new, guys. I hope that everyone is doing well and that you are safe and sound. So, I'm kicking off something I've never done before today because I want to try and do something a little bit different from, just the weekly album reviews and things like that. So, I've come up with the idea of the Backtrackalogue. So let me explain this for anyone who may not have heard of this before, but basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose a band whose discography I'm going to look through and then choose a single song out of each of their albums. It's only albums, no EPs, no live albums, no nothing, just kind of like really core album stuff. Then I'm going to explain why I chose the song, what the context of it with the band is about, all that sort of stuff, what it means to me. So I decided to start this off with probably one of the hardest bands I could have chosen, which is Mastodon. This band are just absolutely exceptional. Like, for me, I think they're one of the most exciting bands that we've had in the last sort of 20-25 years. And they create this sense of, like, odyssey, I think, about every single one of their albums. Even the ones that aren't concept albums, they still sweep you away. So I'm really, really thrilled to have Mastodon be the first kind of trial of this Backtrackalogue. So I hope you guys enjoy it. And without further ado, I'm going to start with Remission and March of the Fire Ants. So this album is based on the element of fire. And what I love about March of the Fire Ants, though, is the power, that unrelenting, immediate power that you find on Mastodon, and particularly on Remission, because it is this quite primal, really sort of like bulldozer sound. You've got like Where Strides the Behemoth and things like that, and I think that it's really well embodied in March of the Fire Ants. But then there's also those kind of weird, delicate moments. There's that malleable riff, the harmonies. I just think it's a really great way to start Mastodon off. And you could tell that they were going to be something more than special. Leviathan is the second album from the band, and it is also based around the idea of the water element. This would be a retelling of Herman Melville's Moby Dick. I think that this album firmly put Mastodon on the map, but for me it's not the single or the big classic riff songs. It's Hearts Alive that really does kind of embody that sense of what Leviathan really is, and I think it's because this track has so much atmosphere, it has such a journey going on. Like when you hear Troy saying pulled into the deep, you could imagine actually being pulled down and slowly kind of going into that, cold, dark abyss of the bottom of the ocean. It also keeps you entertained right the way through. It's a 13-minute song, so it's not exactly like a short thing, but it goes through so many different variations and so many different motions, ending with this massive guitar solo, and you've got those unreal harmonies, which are some of my favourite harmonies still to this day. But most of all, it's that journey. It is that sense of the cinematic, and you've got the waves at the beginning, and it just really sweeps me into that world of what I would imagine, a wreckage with this huge white whale to be in Moby Dick. So this is the first album on a major record label. This was also the third album which featured an element, which of this element is Earth, and it's probably my favourite Mastodon album, actually. It sort of seesaws with Leviathan and Crack the Sky. But what I love about Blood Mountain is that real sense of weird started to come in. So the concept of the album is about this character who is in search of the crystal skull, which is supposed to remove the reptilian brain and then allows you to move into that next step of the evolution. So like that in itself sounds like a weird acid trip. I think it's got quite a rough and ready sound to it, but like I said, has more of that experimentation going on. There's definitely riffs that you could have seen in Remission, for example, but then there are these really interesting sound effects that are throughout the album and all this sort of stuff. But the song I've chosen is Sleeping Giant, because I think this song really embodies the whole of Blood Mountain. I don't know what it is about it, but again, it's that atmosphere. It just sounds like you're in this huge cave and like looking up at all these crazy creatures, and I think it's also the sense of anticipation of what the journey's going to hold. You know, you've got Circle of Sisquatch, Colony of Birchmen, which was actually inspired by the Colony of the Slippermen, which is a Genesis song, which I didn't know. And all these other sort of cinematic things, and I think it all starts properly after The Wolf is Loose and after Crystal Skull with Sleeping Giant. There's also so many kind of cavernous little vocal lines that happen in this song, and it's just really, really interesting. And I think that's really what I love the most about Mastodon, is that you get lost in their music. Now we move on to Crack the Sky, which a lot of people say is the quintessential Mastodon album. It's the album that represents spirits, the ether, and everything from the world of beyond. It's also the first album that featured Bran as a vocalist, and apparently the band were listening to a lot of Pink Floyd's Animals and King Crimson's In the Court of the Crimson King, and you can tell because this is without a doubt one of the finest prog rock albums ever made. It's got everything. The story is, again, absolutely insane, but then you've got the sort of floaty feeling, and that's why I've chosen the title track, which is Crack the Sky. It's an amazing juxtaposition of, again, their two styles, which are always kind of battling it out somewhat in Mastodon, which is the incredible crushing heaviness, you know, that you would see with the guest vocals of Scott Kelly on this song, which has that really like, almost like a giant rearing its head with those kind of riffs. But then you've got this really floating, arid sort of sound, which particularly I think is put forward by the fact that Bran was on vocals, and that really kind of changed things up. And I also think that, you know, the Crack the Sky song kind of encompasses the whole album in one fell swoop. Like I said, you know, it's always going back to this idea of the psychedelia, the cinematic, and creating this weird world that no one else can ever touch. This is kind of a dedication to Brent's brother, who was killed whilst hunting, and although there is no specific kind of concept, the theme of wood is kind of seen throughout the album. And for me, the reason I chose this song is because I think it's, again, that sort of quite airy sound that Mastodon are really kind of au fait with, but then it has that sense of real kind of anchorage, particularly with the rhythmic stuff. And I think Stargasm is a brilliant song. I'm not that keen on the album as a whole because I think it doesn't quite flow in the same sort of brilliant way as the others. But this song individually I think is really, really great. And I think that Hunter is where the band really started to focus on writing rock songs and kind of compressing their sound to kind of less sprawling prog epics, but more of a kind of, 3-minute punch. So the reason I mentioned the Hunter having, those kind of songs is because I think it really does set the stage for Once More Round the Sun. And for me, Once More Round the Sun was a perfect compromise. So you're able to have a really clever, really direct and quite immediate rock song, but then midway through it kind of goes off into the ether and floats around a bit, but then it always comes back to that initial rock riff, which I think is really important. And the track I've chosen for this one is Chimes at Midnight, because I just think it has those riffs which are really, you know, chunky and groovy, and those sort of like leapfrogging guitar licks. But then the chorus, which is sung by Brent, and I think it's one of the finest Brent choruses there are, just goes out of this world. And I remember listening to this for the first time, and I remember thinking like, wow, they've really nailed the sound of, you know, what their distillation of Mastodon really is. I also think that the artwork, you know, again creates this sort of world that Skinner, it's like a kind of nightmare sort of different dimension, and again heightens that sense of the sort of light and the dark, which I really like on Once More Around the Sun. So finally we come to the modern day, which is Emperor of Sand. So if you're not familiar with the Emperor of Sand, this is when they kind of went back to the idea of a concept album, and what a concept this one is. So the Emperor of Sand is deemed as the controller of time, and he kind of hands down this death sentence to this protagonist. And the protagonist is sort of banished into the desert, and what they wanted to do was to create an allegory of the Emperor of Sand being Cancer, essentially. So the sun is like the radiation, and he's basically trying to call out to these other tribesmen to create a rain dance, and the other tribesmen are meant to be the various different ways that you can approach cancer and the ways that you can approach dealing with it. And in the end, he meets these other crystalline people who kind of lead him astray, and they're meant to embody the snake oil peddlers and things like that. So the Emperor's sort of minions catch up with him, and they do capture him. And because he's been so kind of medicated and he's completely out of it, he's been taken into this tent to be killed, but he thinks he's just going to have a bath with the Emperor's daughters. And then he dies, and he becomes this jaguar god, which is meant to represent the idea of rebirth in Mayan mythology, apparently. So that's a hell of a lot to get your head around. But the thing is with this album is it was very much members of Mastodon's family, like pretty much everyone suffered from cancer, and I think cancer is such a universally felt thing that it really kind of rang true with a lot of other people as well. So the reason I've chosen Jaguar God as my choice for this album is because, one, it's a fantastic way to end an album, and I think it really represents this idea of acceptance, and of the fact that, you know, we are all going to die, and that, you know, you just have to be accepting of death. And that's, I think, very much, obviously I can't speak for anyone who's been through the trauma of having cancer, but I can imagine there's a lot that you really think about, and you look at how your life is, and you accept your path, and you accept what you've done, and you accept how you've lived your life. And I feel that is really well kind of portrayed on that song, and really kind of gets into the sort of philosophical mindset of what it's like to kind of greet death in a way. It's also just a really great song, like, you know, it just moves from so many different interesting parts, and you've got that sort of thrashy bit at the end, and then it ends with that really kind of cathartic acoustic sound that just sort of floats off and makes you want to listen to the song all over again. So that's the first Backtrackalogue. I would love to hear what you guys thought of it. It took me absolutely ages to get this sorted. I've changed my mind, I've like scrubbed out all of my decisions and changed something else, but at the end of the day, I think these songs really are the best of the best in Mastodon's discography, which I really, really regret going through now, because it's such a hard choice to try and distill what one of your favourite bands and each of your favourite songs in their album. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, hit that like and subscribe button. Also make sure to leave a comment, because I really want to see what you guys think is the best song. You know, what's your favourite song off each album? what's your all-time favourite song. I'd love to hear. And also your experience with Mastodon, because I'm sure I'm not alone in some of the best experiences I've had have been Mastodon. Like, for example, I saw Mastodon play to like 50 people. It was just insane. They had Scott Kelly with them as well. It was part of the Kerrang Pit. It was just amazing. And I've got so many fantastic memories that are sort of like intrinsically entwined with Mastodon. So thanks ever so much for tuning in. And if you've got this far, it really means the world. And I will see you guys very, very soon for the next Backtrackalogue.